Good afternoon and welcome to the first series of Landscape as Urbanism. This is the first of the series that will take place during this week. This event is made possible thanks to the generous support of David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies at Harvard. It works to increase knowledge of the culture, economies, histories, environment, and contemporary affairs of Latin America, to foster cooperation and understanding among the people of the Americas, and to contribute to democracy, social progress, and sustainable development through the hemisphere. To advance its mission, Dr. Klaas established 3 overseas offices: the regional office in Santiago, the Brazil office in Sao Paulo, and the Mexico and Central America office in Mexico City. The regional office for the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies established a regional office in Santiago in 2002 to offer support to Harvard faculty, students, and staff from any part of the university, and to strengthen ties between the university and institutions in the region, with guidance and support from the RO Advisory Group and other regional partners. The office primarily serves the Southern Cone and the Andean countries of Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, Peru, and Uruguay. If some of you might like to have further information, Marcela Ramos, the Director for Latin America, is here with us, who can provide generously more information after the lectures. The other big supporters for this series, of course, it's Harvard Graduate School of Design, led by the Office for Urbanization, led by Charles Waldheim, and the generous support of Urbam at EAFIT, who is the strategic partner for these lectures. So now I will begin with my presentation. I think we are all set. Thank you very much. Thank you, Urbam, Dr. Klaas, and Harvard Graduate School of Design, Office for Urbanization, and the kindness of Luis Callejas, who was also part of the organization. Thank you very much for the invitation. The title is Imprecise Tropics. I think it's very important to recognize that landscape in Colombia had become something political for many years, due to the politicization of landscape, thanks to the work of drug dealing and narco traffic. We moved from this idea of landscape as a horizon, as somewhere to go, as a nature that stands outside of our society, as a place that had to be colonized, to a place that had been colonized in a different way, especially by the war on drugs. The war on drugs, it's a war on landscape. But I will not go to the political path to make my point, because I think that we are moving, or I would like to move toward the idea of landscape, more engaged with design, or the way how landscape had evolved even from art, but maybe moving more into design and what we can create with it. We have a prehistory that may allow us to enter a discipline still silent in our context. So what we understand as landscape remains imprecise. It is a melange of visual art principles, ecological thinking, urban interventions for the public realm, engineering, and design, mainly for a society that is in transformation or that goes into constant change. In some occasions, landscape is a subproduct of an engineering operation. So I would like to introduce the region where we live and the country. This is some pictures taken by Camilo Echavarria, an artist that we will watch a video afterwards. And I think it's interesting to show the big diversity, not only as a landscape, but also as the sources of nature and how we understand geography, climate, atmosphere, and time. I think one of the most difficult tasks to be engaged in landscape right now, or to create a narrative for architecture or for landscape in places such as Colombia or Latin America, is that we still lack a narrative about the tropic that is not nostalgic, or that it doesn't belong straight or directly from the modern perception. So when you look for tropical, this is the word this is the images that appear, or the other cliche that we inhabit as architects and landscape designers is the idea that Andean is this. It's a bunch of llamas with very brightful colors that create this image that seems to be completely unrelated. But in fact, the tropic, it's about both of them at the same time. So the description of the tropic as a material that allows us to create a position toward landscape or architecture still needs to be constructed, still needs to be built upon several tasks and ideas. So the more we know about nature, the more it becomes landscape. Landscape in the tropics make no distinction between inside and outside. It's the common thread. It's the atmosphere that moves around. It's the situation that we experience when we go from the inside to the outside. It's a continuous line full of experiences. And third, we know we are designing when we ask ourselves about the use or implications, its performance of what we do, even before or beyond representation. So within this frame, I would like to introduce certain ideas that will lead us to the presentation of some of our projects at the office. So we understand the territory in 4 different conditions: the urban, the countryside, rurality, and wilderness. And we have different instruments to interact or operate in these conditions. The more we go into the wilderness, the less instruments we have as architects or as designers. They begin to belong more to science or biology. And the more we move into the urban, they have been much more driven by design practice, architecture, or theory. But I think the interesting thing is that due to the changes that we go right now in our region and in our country, these different conditions have begun to interlace one to each other, creating new opportunities and new positions for these different practices to emerge or to operate in a different way. So the first of all will be that we cannot avoid in a kind of making a prehistory of the practice. The one will be the Humboldt idea of nature, which I think that depicts very well the idea of geography, climate, condition, ecology. At the same time, as inherited from the Humboldt tradition, of course, the images or the paintings by Frederick Edwin Church, the heart of the Andes, and the idea of atmosphere, time, and geography, placed in a very interesting way that it repeats itself many ways and in many occasions throughout the development of a landscape perspective in Colombia and Latin America. And then we begin to observe how we have moved, or how we are moving from, at the beginning in the 18th century, thanks to the botanic expedition, how we were engaging with wilderness and botany, first with José Celestino Mutins in 1783, but then at the beginning of the 19th century, the Chorographic Commission, then the approach was mainly investigating and depicting through graphical descriptions, mainly taken from art, how we were taking, understanding wilderness and rurality, but mainly botany and geography. Then at the turn of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, the construction of the railroad for Antioquia, for the province where we are right now, then this engagement with landscape began to be more open, because it was then about how to be urban and moving from one urban center to the other one, but into that movement try to cross different scales, countryside, rurality, and wilderness. And we've been always been haunted by this myth of transportation, because it's always been hard to get out of these mountains. So the railroad was one of the first civil engineer processes that began to take place in the region, derived from a gold mining economy extraction, which is the basis of our education as engineers in this country, in this region. We can see here one of the pictures of the construction of the railroad. The construction of the railroad was thanks to a civil engineer called Francisco José Cisneros from Cuba. And then at the turn of the century, in 1899, the Sociedad de Mejoras Públicas, which means like Society for Public Improvement and Decoration, takes 2 very important decisions. One is the creation of the Garden of Independence, which is today the Botanic Garden. They hire some garden designers. It's the first time that design comes into the page, comes into action. It's not about engineering, but now it's about more how to create space using plants and different species. And the second decision the Sociedad de Mejoras Públicas takes 50 years later is the construction of the airport. And the airport, Olaya Herrera, begin to articulate this, the first landscape designer that was hired, that was Narciso Gros, also coming from Cuba. One of the remaining gardens that are there is the roundabout. Again, the myth of the transportation and the roundabout. And again, this begins to appear like landscape is the sub-product of a civil engineer or transportation engineer operation. Then when we move to the 20th century, in 1955, the foundation of EPM, Empresas Públicas de Medellín, which is the utilities company of the region being founded, then they first take urban design, garden design, civil engineering, geography, and botany all together for the construction of hydroelectrics. So then the mentality goes toward the wilderness and rurality, activating new pieces of land, new pieces of infrastructure that had to do with mainly hydroelectric, but then to be able to be sure that the water supply will be always available, they began to do a process of reforestation, taking care of the different ecosystems where they placed their interventions. So we can see here the first interventions as infrastructure into the landscape, mainly driven for energetical reasons, energy production reasons. Then something happened along the way, which is that in 1950, José Luis Sert, it's appointed to do the Plan Piloto para Medellín, where you can see that he was taking into account all the creeks, and then this is all the system understood at the beginning as an ecological or an ecosystem working for urban matters. But then something happened along the way, and this became urban design and got rid of the idea of landscape as a way of engaging with not only what we understand as landscape, but also with the public realm and the public space. So then we reach the early 90s. I'm sorry for the pixelation of the image. It was not meant to be this way. We reach this, and we reach a series of projects coming from the mayor's office, mainly, or most of them, coming from public competitions. The first one is 1993, San Antonio Park, by Ana Elvira Vélez and Echeverri Arquitectos, coming exactly from an idea of La Villette, and it was a bunch of stripes, a stripes of a flower garden, referred not only as a cultural fact of the silleteros, but also as creating a first environmental complex with ecological systems working together. The second project is Ana Elvira Vélez, Felipe Uribe, and Joan Espera from 1998, Barefoot Park, or Parque a los Pies Descalzos, also a commission by EPM, the company that was giving utilities, that was providing utilities. Now they begin to create a role for public services as public space and public space for the domain of the citizens. Then we move to 2005, and now we enter a realm of projects, some of them of my office. The first one that I want to show is the Botanic Garden, the Orchid House, in association with Plan B Architects and J. Paul Restrepo, where we understood the building, a building for flower exhibition, to be understood as a big canopy that makes no difference between the forest or between artificial or natural, to let the air go through and the atmosphere come together, to be an extension of the site of the Botanic Garden, and at the same time, understanding that each one of these different small patios could have a different content coming from nature. Butterflies, birds, nesting for birds, feeding animals, etc., but at the same time, having this ambiguous condition, which I think that ambiguity is one of the most interesting characteristics of the kind of space we are able to create in the tropic. So this ambiguity was also taken into an urban condition, being able to play as a round and as an extension of the sidewalk or the surrounding of the park, or also working in an autonomous way as the core of the park. So the building is mainly this, a steel structure covered with wood, where the light goes on and works more like a covered canopy that allows light to go through. Then in 2009, we did a competition for a public library here in Medellín. And then this was a neighborhood that is called San Cristobal. It's a little bit on the outskirts of the city. It's a society that is shifting its way from a rural condition of agricultural plants and agricultural condition into an urban society. So we thought that why not understand that the public space was like an orchard, where people could not only grow plants, vegetables, and understand the role of public space by something they already knew, but at the same time that this public space will mutate or will change from this open school of nursery for plants and orchard, and then mutate and become a reforestation. So they will change and will use time as changing from a rural society to make it into an urban society, but using landscape as a way to approach this change and understand society from a different perspective. So we were thinking also about how nature could play a role there, this idea of landscape. We were planning that all these stripes were able to collect the water by land forming. This land forming will allow us to collect the water to water the plants and the open school for agricultural purposes. Also to use and reuse the energy that came out of the architecture of the agro school, and then the building itself will play the role of as a very strong urban content. But all the public space was meant to be, or meant to do this translation from rural to urban, which I think that was very interesting. So we were also thinking how to describe or how to depict these images of tropicality and conditions. So we were always trying to create these ecosystems to work together, not only the building, but also the public space. The other project, it's a research we did that is called Pharma Park, or the possibility for a landscape of biochemical ecology. And we were addressing the question of food, cosmetics, and pharmaceutical, because we believe that in the tropic, trees or plants can be organized in a different way, not only for what they look like, but also for what they can do. And when we understand what they can do, we are talking about the possibility of the biochemical production that they create, and we can organize public space or public interventions in the border of the cities, articulating rurality, countryside, and wilderness, that will help us not only preserve, but at the same time have a certain economical exploitation that will work like reverse mining. Instead of taking out, we will bring in different plants. So we made an analysis of coffee, tea, cosmetics, chocolate, and some pharmaceutical companies. And we discover a very wide range of different products. This is mainly cosmetics, what I will address right now. And then we began to establish what are the benefits for the body in each one of these components that were described in the products, and then how they work in the human body. Then we located all of these different plants around the world and made an inventory in the department of Antioquia where these plants can be planted and how they can become public parks. And then we realized that we made a chart, for each one of these flowers with different conditions, different performative conditions, either be medical, either be aesthetical, either be for remediation, etc. And then we place all these in the areas of opportunity. So these areas were meant to be, these parks were meant to be implemented in different regions of the department in order to create not only an economical driver, a new economical condition, but also a new way of having economical resources. And last, this is a project for a competition we did in 2012. And we were understanding, this is for an innovation center for Cementos Argos, for a company of cement in the University of EAFIT. So we were thinking that maybe it was very important not only to depict or to create a building that were able to create a narrative around nature, but also the process of fabrication. So how could we create this ecological system that will be able to describe not only the production, but the relation with the site? So what we did was like a stacking of different conditions of geology, like geology coming out into the facade, but at the same time letting light and letting different variations of the exterior coming into the interior according to the program. This is the building, so all the garden and all the public space were also meant to work as a natural infrastructure, use nature as infrastructure. So we were thinking about how the birds will go in and what will be the plants that will come, what will be the plants that will attract birds, and how the time will be expressed through change. So the floor had this kind of pavement that was able to collect water, bring the water into the building, and make all this work as a system. At the same time, the different ways we understood the facades were mainly how to attract also the birds and make this facade operate with these long-distance relations that take place every year, which Medellín is one of the best hubs for birds to stop in the way to the north or to the south. So the facade was mainly this kind of brick system to allow the birds to come in. And last, this is a project from one of my students at the GSD that I think it's very interesting because it's able to create, it's from Caio Arbosa, an MArch2, graduating in 2016 during the next this spring. And it's interesting because it's how to create this building by creating or moving dirt, but at the same time having a roof and having this condition of breathing through the air by no mechanical means, and using all different kind of plants and species to make not only the building work as a space, but also to relate with different social conditions as education in the rural areas of Colombia. Thank you very much.